Notice of motion for Bills number 1, Climate Change Bill introduction.
I call the member for Newtown.
Mr Speaker, I move that a bill be introduced for an act to provide a framework for action on climate change mitigation and adaptation in the state, to set targets for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and to provide for monitoring and reporting of the impacts of climate change on people, communities and ecosystems in the state.
The question is that this bill be now introduced. All of that opinions say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The member for Newtown.
I bring up the bill and move that this bill now be read a second time. Climate change is real. It is happening, and it is clear that we need to massively step up our efforts, not just here in this place in New South Wales, but across this country and around the globe, if we are going to prevent the most catastrophic impact of this reality on our world, on our lives, on our planet, on our people, and on the precious environment that is part of our planet. But it is not all doom and gloom. The positive part of this reality is that people and communities in New South Wales, across this land and throughout the world are already taking matters into their own hands. They are already acting to prevent dangerous climate change, and they are calling on politicians and parliaments to act now too. Once again, it is the people who are leading the way, and it is the politicians and the governments that are scrambling to catch up or still living in denial with their heads in the sand. The Greens have a long and strong and proud tradition of standing with communities, in supporting grassroots movements and of raising and representing these views in the Parliament. In fact, our first leader, parliamentary leader, Bob Brown, was the person who was most known for this, and it is the foundations of our party, and it is the inspiration for so many of us, including myself, for why we are here. Because it is communities and people on the streets that will lead the way, and it is parliaments that must respond and react and follow. Today, by introducing the Greens Climate Change Bill 2016 to the Legislative Assembly of the New South Wales Parliament, we are continuing this approach. We are seeking to bring the chance of the hundreds and thousands of people who have marched on the streets in climate actions, at Walk Against Warmings and other protests, and the determination of those who have occupied corporate polluters' offices, the foyers of our national parliaments, and locked on to machinery or infrastructure to prevent it from destroying our natural environment and adding to climate change, and the strength of the networks and groups and organisations that make up the global environment movement in this country and around the world. Here, by introducing this bill, we are saying that the Greens have heard your calls. We have seen your determined actions. We have seen your strength and courage, your putting of your physical bodies on the line to save our planet and to get action on climate change. And we in this place introduce this bill in solidarity with you and the actions that you take on the streets, in the corporate polluters' offices, and on the many, many different sites of mines, of environmental destruction, where you take action, lock on, engage in non-violent direct action to prevent the damage that is happening to our natural environment and to our planet. With this bill, we want to make sure that our whole state has a coherent and all-encompassing framework to ensure that the New South Wales Government delivers an adequate and coordinated approach to climate change. Before I outline the detail of what this bill includes, I wish to acknowledge the work of my Greens colleague in the other place, Jan Barham, whose office and her have done an incredible amount of behind-the-scenes work and community engagement to make this bill a reality. Jan is incredibly passionate about the protection of our planet and the well-being of the people who inhabit it, and this legislation demonstrates her commitment to ensuring that this is something that all of us here can do to take action on climate change, because it is just too great a problem to ignore. Speaking in the other place, Jan stated, "If this Parliament is to act in the best interests of the people of New South Wales now and in the future, it is our responsibility to ensure that the laws of the state prioritise reducing the risks and impacts of climate change. There is unprecedented but unforeseeable risk, and there are things that can be done to address it. It is our responsibility to act." And that is why it is the Greens that are bringing this bill to this place. I'll go through briefly now the details of what the bill will achieve. The bill includes a set of guiding principles that includes a statement of scientific consensus regarding climate change and the international commitment to attempt to limit global warming by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and that assert the need for planning and action across all aspects of government to contribute to climate change adaptation and mitigation. The bill provides that all New South Wales legislation is to be interpreted in accordance with the guiding principles, and the Minister is to have regard for the principles when exercising functions under this legislation. We know that climate change is not just an issue that should sit with the environment portfolio. We know that the actions of this government across a whole range of portfolios is contributing to dangerous climate change. And we also know that is the responsibility of ministers across all portfolios and government departments to be ready to assist with the mitigation and the support of the community and the recognition of the disasters that will occur as a result of what we see from climate change. The bill will also set a primary target of achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, with interim targets of 25% below 2000 levels by 2020, 40 to 50% by 2025, and 60 to 80% by 2030. As governments around the world are starting to live up to their obligations agreed to at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Paris, even big polluters like China and the US are moving to act. Australia, on the other hand, continues to lag behind. All the major polluters are starting to move, and yet this country is so far behind. It is pretty clear that what gets measured gets done. That's why we need to set targets, and that's why we need to see reporting. The emissions targets set in this bill are consistent with the recommendations of the Climate and Health Alliance and the World Wildlife Fund. They are similar to the Climate Institute's recommendations, and with international calls by scientists and island states to maintain a realistic possibility of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, these targets would ensure New South Wales commits to emissions reduction that reflects the scientific consensus, requiring a rapid transition to a decarbonised economy and society that ensure the state is delivering leadership on climate change mitigation that is lacking at a national level. New South Wales has the opportunity to step up, and it is incumbent on us to do so because of the impacts it will have on our environment and our community. The bill also includes a requirement that the designated minister prepare 2 plans at 4-year intervals. The New South Wales Greenhouse Gas Emissions Plan, which must first be prepared by June 2017, is to set a carbon budget for each year in the following 4-year period and identify strategic priorities and plan policies and programs to meet carbon budgets. The second is the New South Wales Climate Change Adaptation Plan, which must first be prepared by June 2018 and is to assess the evidence about projected climate impacts and risks and identify strategic priorities for and plan programs and policies for managing impacts, risks, vulnerabilities related to climate change. The bill will also put a requirement on all government departments, local councils and public authorities to prepare a climate change action plan. At 4-year intervals, these plans will be due first by the end of December 2018 and outlining their planned contributions to the climate change mitigation and adaptation to achieving the priorities set out in the New South Wales plans. The bill will also put obligations on public authorities for all functions to be exercised in a way that does not reduce the state's capacity to meet its emissions targets or to adapt to the likely impacts of climate change. Judicial review will be available so that legal action can be taken to remedy or restrain any actions or decisions that would decrease the state's ability to meet the emissions targets and adapt to climate change. Private entities committed to climate action can voluntarily request to be bound by the same obligations to produce action plans and to be subject to legal review of actions. What we know is that what is measured gets done. By setting targets, by requiring reporting, and by actually putting in place things that are checks and balances and obligations on public authorities, that is how we will see an integrated action by this government. That is why the bill also includes the establishment of a New South Wales Climate Change Commission to provide independent advice and recommendations about climate change to the Minister and to consult with and provide information to communities, local government, non-government organisations and businesses relating to action on climate change. The Minister is required to seek the Commission's advice and have regard to it when exercising functions under the bill, and the Commission will also publish any advice and recommendations provided to the Minister and may also publish special reports. A requirement for an annual climate change progress report by the Minister to be made public and presented to Parliament is the final element of the bill. This would report on progress and actions in all aspects of the plans and functions provided under the Act, including an analysis of whether carbon budgets have been met. If carbon budgets have not been met, the Minister must explain why not and set out a planned action to ensure future budgets are met and to compensate for excess emissions. It is clear, and as I have said before, governments around the world are stepping up to take this action, but not here in Australia. We have seen that governments in Australia have fallen short consistently. And while we have seen that successive governments in New South Wales and nationally have pointed to specific initiatives, introduced individual schemes and programs, none have successfully managed to make this a sustained, all-of-government integrated response, handling the biggest challenge that we face as a society. And that is why we need to step up in New South Wales and look at the idea of introducing and supporting a bill that would see climate change addressed across a whole-of-government approach. A number of nations and states and territories have in fact enacted climate change legislation. In 2008, the United Kingdom Climate Change Act 12 became law. Their Act includes strong key features, including statutory long-term emissions reduction targets, annual carbon budgets and an independent committee on climate change. In Australia, there are several pieces of climate change legislation passed by other states and territories. The South Australia's Climate Change and Greenhouse Emissions Reduction Act, the ACT's Climate Change and Greenhouse Reduction Act and the Victorian Climate Change Act. These acts vary in terms of the targets they set and other features, but each includes some kind of framework for this that is established in this bill. The Victorian Act originally included an emissions reduction target, but was unfortunately amended to remove that. It is now another review underway. What we know is that New South Wales and successive New South Wales government continue to be addicted to the fossil fuel polluting industries. We know the corrupting influence that these industries have had on politics in New South Wales, of both current and Liberal national governments and former Labor governments. This year, earlier in the year, when Greens member for Balmain, my colleague in this place, introduced the Mining and Petroleum Industry Political Donations Legislation Amendment Bill, which sought to reduce corruption in New South Wales by banning political donations from mining and petroleum companies, we saw that the Labor opposition joined with the government to oppose the Greens bill. The Greens bill attempted to stop the corrupting influence of the mining and petroleum industry on the decisions that were made in this place. And we saw the Labor opposition join with the Liberal national government to vote against the bill and allow them to continue to take corrupting donations from the mining and petroleum industry. In the other place, at about midday today, my Greens colleague Jeremy Buckingham will introduce a No New Coal Mines bill to that place. And that shows, I think, the concerted and committed effort of the Greens across the New South Wales Parliament and across parliaments in this country and in Australia to be able to stand up for and make sure that we actually are responding to dangerous climate change. There is no coherent framework in New South Wales for ensuring the government delivers an adequate and coordinated response to climate change. The New South Wales Greenhouse Gas Reduction Scheme was scrapped in 2012 following the introduction of the federal carbon price. What we know is this should not just be left to the Minister for Environment. And I'd like to point to one example of that, and that is a recent health and climate change forum that was held in our nation's capital. It found that 98%, preliminary findings of this survey found that 98% of health professionals agreed with the need for a national strategy on climate, health and well-being. What we found was 40% what we found is 40 Australian leading health and medical experts coming together to raise their deep concerns that the health sector had, that there was no national health plan to deal with the impacts of climate change. The impacts that they discussed were the risks of injuries and illnesses associated with extreme weather events such as bushfires, extreme storms, floodings and heat waves, the mental health impacts of disasters and aftermath, and the increased spread of infectious diseases and the worsening of air qualities. We know that there will be health impacts as a result of climate change, and we also know that there will be a need for our health areas and our health sector to respond, to deal with and support the community as we see the impacts of climate change becoming real. This is just one example of why we cannot allow climate change to continue to sit just with the environment portfolio. What we need to do is we need to see that climate change is responded to by all areas of government, health, but also when we look to it, transport, when we look to it, roads, when we look to it, energy, when we look to it, resources, when we look to it across the whole of government, we need to be able to respond. And that is why the Greens Bill seeks to set this framework, a coherent framework, across all areas of government. Can I just say that it is particularly needed in the area of transport and roads. The fact that we see a roads minister as separate to the transport minister, so that we can't have an integrated approach to dealing with the challenges of congestion in our cities and the challenges of our regional and rural communities to be able to move to where they want to, because actually we have a roads minister that is intent on delivering roads and more roads, while we have a transport minister who is then attempting to deliver transport projects, demonstrates the need for a more coherent approach. This bill will require current and future New South Wales governments across all departments and in coordination with local councils to plan for and deliver effective action for climate change mitigation and adaptation, to work towards ensuring human and ecological health and well-being, and to recognise the need to plan for climate impacts on all people, particularly the vulnerable and disadvantaged. And it is also crucial when we see that the kind of attacks we have seen on native vegetation and land clearing, the kind of attacks that we are seeing on our wildlife, the kind of attacks we are seeing on our marine areas, that actually this is a bigger issue that goes across the whole of government, something that the Greens are committed to working on. It is also something that my colleagues in the other place have continued to push for, and something that we will continue to work for in a coordinated effort across this Parliament and with the community. And on that note, I would like to acknowledge Phil Bradley, who is a member of the Greens Climate Change Working Group, who has joined us today in the chamber to hear the introduction of this bill. It is crucial that there is a response that is integrated across the whole of government. As we have seen from the health sector and their calls, as we have seen from communities standing up to protect their land and their water in the agricultural industry and the agricultural sector, and as we see from the innovative and creative renewable energy sector that have stepped up. And I would like to make mention of one particular initiative that we have seen recently that is creating solar-powered beer in the electorate of Newtown, a partnership between Pingala and Young Henrys, and I should note that I declare an interest that I am an investor in this initiative, and I would like to say that it would be wonderful if more people in this place declared an interest in the renewable energy sector, as opposed to having to declare interest from donations from mining and petroleum companies, which is unfortunately what we see on the register of most members in this place. I am proud to be an investor in solar-powered beer, an initiative that actually uses the solar energy on the rooftop of Young Henrys to create renewable energy and allows community control and community investment in solar. I've mentioned it already, you can go back and look, but I'm not going to do an ad. So what we see here is that the New South Wales government has the potential to do it, but they are struggling against themselves. On one hand, we hear those on the other side encouraging the idea of investment in the renewable energy sector, but we see a resistance to set any measurable targets. And once again I say it, if you won't set targets, if you won't make yourself accountable, if you don't actually put obligations on all of the areas of government to meet those targets, we will not see the action that is needed to address dangerous climate change. It is crucial that New South Wales government departments, agencies and local councils that engage in a range of activities develop climate action plans.
Order. In accordance with the sessional orders, debate is interrupted.
I call the member for Newtown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to continue the introduction of the Climate Change Bill 2016 on behalf of the Greens in this place. To reiterate, the overview of this bill is to set targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to facilitate the government's development of strategies, policies and programs to meet those targets and to adapt to the effects of climate change, to promote transparency and accountability by facilitating the provision of accessible information about the effects of climate change on people, communities and ecosystems across the state, and to encourage the local government sector, the private business sector and the wider community to take action to address climate change. We have seen since the discussion started on climate change and the need for a climate change bill in this place, the New South Wales government introduced a plan which was reported as setting a net zero carbon emissions goal by 2050 as Australian pollution climbs. While on one hand it is welcome to see the Baird government announce that they would set a net zero emissions target by 2050 and allocate money to encourage energy efficiency and renewable energy, and to see that with this announcement the government has been listening to the calls by the Greens and the calls by many, many groups and organisations across this state, across this country and in fact across the planet who have been calling for governments to take action in relation to zero emissions, there is clear that much more needs to be done. In fact, the report on the New South Wales government plan that was introduced, that was announced on November the 3rd, made the comment, there are no interim targets, such as 2030 at this point, nor are there guarantees that policies promoting increased emissions, such as new coal mines or increased land clearing, will be blocked. And it's important to note that this announcement by the New South Wales government looking to attempt to address the serious impact of climate change on our communities and on our planet was done with no commitment to shedding what are the dinosaur attitudes towards energy and climate that we have seen for too long in New South Wales. A zero net emissions target will not be reached unless we deal with coal. Banning new coal mines is an essential step if we are truly to reach this goal. We need a state-based renewable energy target and to formulate a concrete transition strategy away from the fossil fuel industry and into renewable energies. And if we don't have targets, if these things are not measured, they will not get done. That is a simple mantra that is repeated time and time again, and something that we know is essential if we are going to see any action to address dangerous climate change. And while we see that both sides of this place, the Liberal National Government and the Labor opposition, both refusing to oppose the introduction of new coal mines, we are in a situation where the New South Wales Government's climate policy change framework, which was announced by the Minister for Environment, is not going far enough in any way to ensure that we see the action needed. What we need to see is that basically there is a respect for the whole of government approach to how we are dealing with the issue of climate change. And the fact that we are seeing these things introduced at a time when, in actual fact, we are in the shadow of the land clearing laws being introduced by the Minister of Environment, and these laws will literally see millions of tonnes of greenhouse gases emitted, and we will see the climate catastrophe waiting to happen and will propel climate change even faster. When the Queensland government, it's important to note, had the same open slather approach to land clearing not that long ago, it resulted in clearing of land the size of the Australian Capital Territory, as well as the release of 35 million tonnes of carbon dioxide. This cancelled out the 80% the abatements purchased by the federal government. This government and I know the Premier is in the chamber, this government is happy to talk on climate change, but we know that until targets are set and until they are measured and until people and governments and the sectors are required to report on them, we will not see the action needed. This government is happy to talk the talk on climate change, to talk renewables, to talk zero emissions, provided they aren't held to account on it. But in actual fact, when we see the calling for people to be held to account, when we see the call for targets to be set, that does not occur, and we know that if the governments really cared, this government really cared about land clearing, cared about climate change, they would not be proposing the current land clearing laws. They would not be introducing these land clearing laws, and they would be recognising and setting targets, strict renewable energy targets, strict targets around all government sectors and what they need to achieve in relation to climate change policy. I'd like to recognise, in conclusion, the incredible work that has been done by a number of organisations and groups that have been campaigning to make sure that we in this place do not forget the importance of climate change. We have Naomi Klein in Sydney this week here to receive the Sydney Peace Prize, and it is yet another reason why we should be remembering that the push to make sure that our governments respond to the urgent need of climate change is not one done by just members of Parliament in this place, by the Greens who stand with those communities, but by a significant number of organisations. And I'd like to recognise the support and the work done on this bill by the Environmental Justice Australia, who worked on a proposal for a Victorian climate charter, and the bill draws on their work, and the Environmental Defender's Office in New South Wales, who's done important advocacy for legal frameworks on climate change. I'd like to acknowledge also a number of other groups who have campaigned consistently and assisted us in this support. The Climate Council, Solar Citizens, the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, Climate Action Network Australia, the Climate Institute, the Australia Conservation Foundation, the Climate and Health Alliance, the Centre for Australian Weather and Climate Research, 350.org, the World Wildlife Fund Australia, Greenpeace, Get Up, Planet Art, Clean Energy for Eternity, Farmers for Climate Action, one of everyone's faves, the Knitting Nanas, the Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales, Lock the Gate, the Grassroots Community Climate Network, the Wilderness Society, the Sunrise Project, Doctors for the Environment, the Sutherland Environment Centre, Stop CSG groups across the state and country, Psychologists for a Safe Climate, Frontline Action Against Coal, and two local initiatives in the electorate of Newtown, the Climate Action Newtown Group and the Green Living Centre. As the late John Kay MLC said, as the slogan in his 100% renewable campaign, this is possible, affordable and essential. I commend the bill to the House.